You know your neighbor's finally gone off the rails when you look out your window and see her waving a pistol at a rescue helicopter. I'm not exaggerating. I was standing on my back deck, sipping coffee, watching paramedics lower a stretcher into my yard because my dad had collapsed while pruning the garden. That's when Karen, the frizzy-haired menace 2 doors down, came storming out of her house in a bathrobe, screaming about government surveillance and airspace violations. And then, because reality is stranger than satire, she raised her arm, aimed at the sky and fired. At a Medivac, with a man dying in my yard. Let me rewind about 3 months. I moved into this quiet, tree-lined neighborhood for my dad's sake. After his second heart scare, I figured downsizing him into a 1-story place close to a decent hospital was the smartest move. I bought the house, moved in temporarily to get him settled, and hoped for peace and hydrangeas. Instead, I met Karen. She introduced herself by handing me a pamphlet about community rules, and glaring at the color of my front door like it personally offended her ancestors. Her smile was a stretched rubber band, and her words were all sugar-glazed barbed wire. I knew immediately she was the local HOA queen bee. Karen had a talent for weaponizing bylaws. She fined me for leaving my trash can out for an extra 30 minutes. She filed a complaint because my dad's wheelchair ramp wasn't in the approved style. When I tried reasoning with her, she fluttered her lashes and said, "This community values order." I started calling her Judge Judy with a clipboard, but I kept my sarcasm to myself. For the most part, what really lit her fuse was the helipad permit. You see, my dad's doctor suggested we register for emergency Medivac services because of his cardiac condition. The city approved a temporary use helipad in our backyard. Not a literal platform, just a space cleared to allow landing in an emergency. We followed every regulation, filed every form, even gave the HOA a heads-up. Karen, of course, objected. Loudly. She showed up to the meeting in a sequined American flag blazer, ranted about noise pollution and shadow government airlifts, and accused me of trying to turn the neighborhood into a warzone. Nobody took her seriously. Except Karen. The night before the incident, she came stomping onto my porch with a laminated petition, signed by exactly one person, her. She waved it like a holy writ and demanded I cease all air activity. I politely told her that medical emergencies weren't up for debate. Her pupils dilated like a snake's and she hissed, "You'll regret this." I assumed she meant more fines or maybe egging my fence. I underestimated her flair for federal crimes. When my dad's heart gave out again the next morning, I called 911. The dispatcher sent an ambulance and authorized a chopper. Within 10 minutes, a low thrum filled the sky. Paramedics were already in the yard prepping the landing zone when Karen came tearing out of her back door like a gremlin in Croc. She was screaming about invasion of privacy, clutching something in her hand. It wasn't until she raised her arms that I realized she had a weapon. Not a toy. A real handgun. I didn't even have time to react before she pulled the trigger. The shot cracked the air. The Medivac jerked. The paramedics ducked. Karen fired again, wailing about sky spies and neighborhood sovereignty. My legs went weak. I dropped my coffee and sprinted toward her, but she was already fumbling with the gun, trying to reload. One of the medics tackled her from behind. Another was already on the phone, presumably with every acronym agency in the book. I grabbed the gun while they restrained her, and she shrieked like a banshee being exorcised. The police were there in under 3 minutes. So were half the neighbors. Karen, red-faced and panting, had the audacity to scream, "Citizen's arrest," at the officers as they slapped cuffs on her. She kept yelling about how I was an agent, and how the helicopter was violating her freedoms. The cops didn't laugh. They just read her rights and shoved her into the cruiser. The Medivac hovered for another minute, then rerouted. My dad went by ambulance. He survived, barely, but the delay could have killed him. The story should have ended there. It didn't. The next day, I got a knock at my door from a man in a sharp navy suit. He showed me a badge and introduced himself as a federal investigator. Karen hadn't just fired at a medical helicopter, she'd accidentally damaged one of the skids. The FAA was involved. Homeland Security too. Apparently, there's a whole list of terrifying consequences for discharging a weapon at an aircraft, especially one marked with a red cross. It didn't help that she'd posted conspiracy-laced rants online the week before, one of which featured a blurry photo of the helicopter and the words, "I know your game." And here's where it gets even more absurd. Her defense attorney, the same one who once ran for local office on a banned fluoride platform, was arguing that Karen acted in defensive desperation. She claimed the chopper was a psychological trigger because of Karen's past trauma during a theme park accident. I'm not making that up. Her court filing compared a rescue helicopter to the trauma of a malfunctioning flying swing ride. By this point, the neighborhood was in full meltdown. Half the residents wanted her evicted. The other half were suddenly terrified of helicopters and thought Karen might be some kind of suburban prophet. One guy even put up a no-fly zone sign made out of pool noodles. I kept quiet, documented everything, and waited, because I had a hunch this mess was far from over. My instincts were right. A few days later, I got a letter from the HOA, signed not by Karen this time, but by her second-in-command, a woman named Eileen who wore pearls to mow the lawn. It claimed that my use of medical air services created an unsafe atmosphere and demanded that I cease all backyard aviation activity. The letter also accused me of excessive dramatization and suggested I was exploiting a senior's medical condition for attention. I laughed so hard I nearly passed out. Instead of responding directly, I forwarded the letter to the federal investigator. His reply? "Thanks. This strengthens the case." So while Karen sat in jail awaiting arraignment, her cronies tried to bury me in petty rules. They underestimated one thing: I document everything. Every letter, every voicemail, every ridiculous confrontation. And I was done playing defense, because if Karen wanted to start a war over my backyard, I was about to make sure she regretted every shot she ever took. The news vans showed up before Karen's arraignment hearing even started. I watched from my living room window as a cameraman from Channel 6 tripped over a garden hose and face-planted into my flower bed. I didn't mind. The begonias were already suffering thanks to the stress of bullet casings and rotor wash. Honestly, I thought it was fitting. Nothing screams suburban dystopia like local news scrambling over a woman who shot at a rescue helicopter because it was invading her personal skies. Karen had made national headlines by that point. The footage of her being dragged off in cuffs, bathrobe flapping in the breeze, had gone viral. Someone even made a TikTok remix where her shrieking was auto-tuned to the tune of Ride of the Valkyries. The HOA board, of course, distanced themselves instantly. Eileen issued a statement on Nextdoor claiming the HOA had no knowledge of Karen's instability and that her actions were not representative of the community. That would have held more weight if I hadn't dug up an email chain from 6 months ago where Eileen openly encouraged Karen to remain firm and unyielding in the face of outsider disruptions. I was the outsider, apparently. And the disruption? A helicopter saving my dad's life. I wasn't content with watching them scurry into PR mode. I had a folder thicker than a law textbook, documented proof of Karen's abuse of power, her obsession with control, her paranoia about government drones. I'd recorded the HOA meeting she chaired, the passive-aggressive emails, even a voicemail where she warned me not to let black vehicles idle outside your house or we'll assume you've defected. All of it had seemed like crackpot theater at the time. Now it was part of a federal case. Meanwhile, Karen had lawyered up with a man named Ron Kessler, a retired used car dealer turned defense attorney whose commercials used to run between reruns of Judge Judy. He leaned into the mentally unwell defense hard. Claimed Karen had been triggered by past trauma, that her medication had been improperly adjusted, that she believed she was protecting the community. I'll admit, part of me pitied her. But then I remembered my dad lying on the stretcher, eyes fluttering, and the delay caused by Karen's outburst. The pity evaporated fast. The real twist came when I got a call from an FBI agent. Agent Connors. No nonsense, flat voice, like someone who'd seen too many weird things to be surprised anymore. He asked to meet in person. I invited him to the house. He arrived with a briefcase and a straight face, the kind of guy who didn't blink unless necessary. He asked a lot of questions, mostly about Karen's behavior leading up to the incident. I gave him everything. Emails, photos, the video of her no drones backyard protest where she wore a tinfoil sun hat and accused Amazon of espionage. He barely reacted. Then he pulled out something from his briefcase, a printout of a forum thread. "Have you ever seen this before?" he asked. I read the page once, then again. It was a conspiracy forum, heavy on the caps lock and spelling errors. Someone with the username HOA Freedom Warrior 76 had been posting for months about deep state infiltration via Medivac vessels, claiming that certain suburban neighborhoods were being used as test zones for surveillance tech. The posts referenced my street by name. One even said, "They're using the old man's yard as a test site. Don't let them fool you with ambulances and fake heart attacks." I felt a cold chill down my spine. "That's her," I said. "Has to be." Connors nodded. "We traced the IP. It's hers." So now it wasn't just about firing at a helicopter. Now Karen was being looked at for online extremism, incitement to violence, and possible involvement in a broader conspiracy community. She wasn't just paranoid, she was actively organizing. Connors explained that while most of these people stayed digital, Karen crossed a line when she took action in the real world. That's when she became a federal problem. A week later, they executed a search warrant on her house. Half the street watched from their porches as agents in windbreakers carried out boxes. I caught a glimpse of one, labeled Documents, Operation Skyfall. No joke. Her garage was apparently a shrine to delusion. Maps with red yarn, printouts of satellite images, articles about the Illuminati owning Medivac. She even had photos of me clipped to a corkboard, circled in red Sharpie. One of them was just me mowing the lawn. The aftermath wasn't quiet. Eileen and the other HOA board members tried to pretend Karen was a rogue element. But then Connors showed me an email. Eileen had forwarded Karen a spreadsheet of residents' medical conditions, which Karen labeled Aviation Risk Index. That spreadsheet included my dad's heart condition. They'd been monitoring us, deciding what counted as a valid emergency. That crossed so many privacy lines it looked like a tic-tac-toe board. Now the HOA itself was under scrutiny. Connors hinted at charges. Not just obstruction, but violation of privacy laws, conspiracy to harass. He asked if I would testify. I said yes before he finished the sentence. As the case built up steam, the neighborhood's tone shifted. People who used to glare at me for not edging my grass now waved sheepishly and asked how my dad was doing. A few even admitted they'd been intimidated by Karen for years but were too afraid to speak up. Turns out fear is a powerful silencer in the suburbs. That's when I made my move. I found a real estate investor friend, someone with cash and no fear of HOA drama, and pitched him an idea. Buy up the empty lots in the neighborhood. Turn them into non-HOA zoned properties. Break the monopoly. He loved it. Within 2 weeks, he'd made offers on 3 houses. Within 2 months, he'd closed on 5. Each one converted into a rental with no HOA oversight. The board panicked. Their power was slipping. Rules started unraveling. Suddenly you could leave your garbage bin out all week and no one would care. Christmas lights stayed up till March. It was chaos. Beautiful, liberating chaos. And then came the nail in the coffin. Karen, out on bail with an ankle monitor, held a community vigil in her front yard, candles, flags, a soapbox she used to rant about aerial tyranny. I didn't attend. But the guy 2 houses down filmed the whole thing. Right as Karen was mid-speech about helicopters being tools of mind control, a bird pooped on her head. She screamed, dropped the mic, which was actually just a karaoke microphone plugged into a Bluetooth speaker, and ran inside. The video went viral again. The title? Karen declares war on birds. I'd be lying if I said I didn't watch it more than once. Meanwhile, Agent Connors kept in touch. The case was expanding. Karen's forum activity had led them to other aviation truthers across the country. They weren't dangerous yet, he said, but they were watching. The FBI had quietly dubbed Karen Patient Zero for suburban flight panic. The arraignment was set for the following month. Federal charges: firearms, interference with emergency services, privacy violations, possibly cybercrime. She was looking at serious time. But I wasn't done. I had one final card to play. Because while the feds focused on her crimes, I discovered something even more poetic. Karen's mortgage had a co-signer, Eileen. And Eileen had just defaulted on an unrelated property in Florida. The dominoes were about to fall, and I was going to be the one to tip them. The auction was held in a county courthouse that smelled like mildew and resignation. It wasn't glamorous. No velvet ropes or fast-talking auctioneers. Just a dusty room with plastic chairs, a tired clerk, and a whiteboard with addresses scribbled across it like grocery items. But I wasn't there for glamour. I was there to end a reign. Karen's house, yes, the same two-story colonial with faux shutters and a flagpole she used to fly bizarre protest banners, was up for foreclosure auction. Technically, it wasn't hers alone. Eileen, her partner in crime and enabler-in-chief, had co-signed her loan a few years back during a home equity cash-out Karen had used to remodel her kitchen and install privacy-grade anti-surveillance blinds. That loan had a balloon payment. Eileen had missed it. The bank had warned her. She'd ignored them, assuming her HOA status made her untouchable. I suppose she forgot that banks don't care about lawn regulations or bake sale committee titles. I didn't attend under my real name. I had my real estate friend do the bidding. Marcus, a guy with a buzz cut, zero patience for nonsense, and a history of flipping houses that had been owned by people with tinfoil tendencies. He understood the assignment. I gave him one instruction: win. No matter the cost. He did. When the gavel came down, Karen's house belonged to us. It felt almost anticlimactic at first. No fireworks. No gasp. Just a nod, a signature, and a set of keys. But when I walked into her yard later that evening, hearing the faint jingle of her paranoid wind chimes, I realized what I'd done. I hadn't just bought her house. I'd bought her fortress. Her sanctum of entitlement. Her control tower. And now I controlled the locks. The eviction notice went out the next morning. Karen had been living there under temporary court approval while awaiting trial. The house was still technically hers until the sale finalized, but the clock had started ticking. She had 10 days to vacate. And suddenly, the woman who had tried to legislate my Christmas lights was knocking on my door. I didn't answer at first. Just watched her through the peephole. She looked smaller than I remembered. Same bathrobe, less volume in her frizzy blonde hair, and circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept in weeks. When she knocked a second time, I opened the door slowly. "You," she said, venom pooling behind the single syllable like it had been aging in a wine barrel. "Me," I replied calmly. "You bought my house." Technically, the bank did. I just happened to be the one holding the check. Her lips tightened. "You're targeting me. Karen, you shot at a Medivac. The feds are targeting you. I just bought a structurally sound fixer-upper." She tried to pivot to moral high ground, claimed I was exploiting her while she was under legal duress, that this was neighborly betrayal. I didn't flinch. I told her plainly. The house had gone into foreclosure due to her and Eileen's financial negligence. I wasn't her enemy. Reality was. Then she begged. Not with tears. Karen wasn't a crier, but with a simmering desperation. "I built everything in that house," she said. "The custom cabinets, The surveillance room. You mean the one with the corkboard full of my photos? She didn't deny it. Just blinked, then said, "You're destroying the community." "No," I corrected her. "You did that. I'm just sweeping up the wreckage." She left without another word. Just turned, stiff-backed, and walked down my porch like she still had a shred of dignity left. It almost made me respect her. Almost. Eileen, on the other hand, didn't take it well. She sent me an email with no punctuation, full of capital letters and biblical references, claiming I was the serpent in the garden, and that the HOA would rise again. I forwarded it to Agent Connors. His response was 2 words: "She's next." With Karen's house in escrow and the FBI case gaining steam, the neighborhood went from stepford to siege mode. HOA members started jumping ship. People who once took pride in citing bylaws suddenly discovered plausible deniability. The HOA newsletter stopped arriving. Their Facebook group went dormant. I watched it all burn down like a slow, delicious bonfire. But I wasn't done. Because I'd found something else inside Karen's house. During the inspection, I'd discovered a crawlspace door behind a fake panel in the study. Inside was a filing cabinet, locked but old. Marcus helped me get it open. What we found inside made my blood boil. Karen had been tracking residents for years. Not just me. Everyone. Health records, pet registrations, financial documents. There was a whole manila folder labeled potential liabilities. She'd made secret files on who had violated noise ordinances, who had cheated on their spouses, who might be vulnerable to HOA pressure. It was a catalog of secrets, neatly indexed, stored in her personal dungeon of control. I took it all to Connors. His eyes darkened when he read through it. "This changes things," he said. "This isn't just harassment. It's espionage-level invasion." They issued a new warrant that night. Seized everything. Karen was arrested again the next morning for violating her bail conditions. Turns out, organizing citizen surveillance cells violates more than just good taste. It's a federal offense. When the moving trucks arrived, I stood across the street, arms folded. Karen wasn't there to watch. She was in a holding cell in the federal courthouse downtown, awaiting a new arraignment. Eileen came, though, stood in the driveway sobbing, watching as workers loaded boxes into the truck. One of them held Karen's commemorative Neighborhood Patriot of the Year plaque. I nearly laughed out loud. I didn't flip the house. I donated it. I gave it, free and clear, to a local organization that housed veterans with PTSD. A group that Karen had once tried to ban from handing out flyers on the sidewalk, claiming they were triggering to the neighborhood aesthetic. The organization held a ceremony a week later. Red, white, and blue bunting. Real community pride. The kind Karen never understood. Neighbors showed up. People who had avoided eye contact with me for months came over with casseroles and awkward apologies. A few even asked if I was considering running for HOA president. I told them there wouldn't be a board left to run. That was the final twist. With Karen indicted, Eileen discredited, and 3 of the 5 board members resigning in disgrace, the HOA was crumbling. The bylaws required a quorum to function. Without it, the charter dissolved. In other words, no more HOA. The woman who had once fined me for having my recycling bin turned the wrong direction had accidentally dismantled her own empire, brick by petty, ridiculous brick. Connors called me one last time. Said Karen had been offered a plea deal. 15 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole if she confessed to the full scope of her actions, including conspiracy, unlawful surveillance, and discharge of a firearm against a civilian aircraft. She hadn't accepted it yet. Still believed she'd get off on a technicality. Still thought the helicopters were spying on her. I told him I wasn't surprised. People like her, I said, never believe they're the villain. Not even when they're pointing a gun at a Medivac. He paused. You did good, you know. A lot of people wouldn't have stood up to her. I shrugged, even though he couldn't see it. All I did was play the long game. She brought the bullets. Bray waved at me. I waved back. 2 weeks after Karen's second arrest, I got an unexpected knock at the door. It wasn't the FBI this time, or a neighbor with another apology casserole. It was a process server. He handed me a thick envelope, gave me a tired look that said, "I don't get paid enough for this," and walked off without a word. I opened the envelope at the kitchen table, half expecting it to be a cease and desist from some leftover HOA cultist. Instead, it was a civil lawsuit. Karen was suing me. Her handwritten complaint, filed from the county detention center, accused me of emotional terrorism, malicious acquisition, and weaponizing neighborhood sentiment. She claimed that buying her foreclosed home was a personal attack designed to humiliate and destabilize. In a separate addendum, she accused me of orchestrating a deep psychological campaign of community-level gaslighting. The phrasing was so unhinged I had to read it twice to make sure it wasn't a prank. And yet, it had been officially filed. At first, I laughed. Then I called Connors. He wasn't laughing. Apparently, Karen had managed to get a sympathetic paralegal to help her draft the suit. It wouldn't hold up in court, but it could slow down the federal case. Delay tactics. Distraction. Noise. Classic Karen. The timing was suspicious too. That same week, someone vandalized the sign for the veteran family's new nonprofit home, painted over the welcome with the words, "This is still Karen Street." They even left behind a half-burned HOA manual duct-taped to the mailbox like some twisted suburban manifesto. The cameras I'd helped install caught 2 people wearing hoodies and masks. But I recognized the posture of one of them, Eileen. I took that footage to the police. Again. They were already working on charging her with conspiracy to commit fraud, but this added vandalism and harassment to her growing list. Eileen, like her mentor, wasn't going down without making a mess. And while she was too cowardly to confront me directly, she had started showing up to every local council meeting, ranting about how mob mentality had seized the neighborhood, and calling me the mole sent to destroy the community from within. People stopped taking her seriously around the time she brought a stuffed owl to a zoning board meeting and accused it of being a drone. Still, the lawsuit dragged on. I was summoned to a hearing. I expected a circus. What I got was worse, a performance. Karen was there, dressed in a modest gray jumpsuit, hair flat for once, looking like a disgraced preacher's wife. She'd coached herself into a tone of mournful martyrdom. Her lawyer, a newly assigned public defender with the look of a man rethinking all his career choices, read her opening statement. "Ms. Tilbrook," he began, "has been systematically harassed by the very individual she once welcomed to this community. She admits to mistakes, serious ones, but believes she is being turned into a national scapegoat by a man with a personal vendetta." I leaned back, arms folded, and said nothing. The judge, to his credit, was not impressed. He cut the theatrics short after 10 minutes, dismissing half the suit on grounds of irrelevance and lack of legal foundation. But he allowed the harassment claim to proceed, just barely, probably to placate due process. Karen tried to glare at me as we left the courtroom, but it lacked her old fire. She looked tired, desperate, like a balloon 3 weeks after the party, still floating but barely hanging on. I didn't say a word, just looked her dead in the eyes and walked out. Later that day, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was her. "I know what you're doing," she said, voice sharp, breathless. "You think you've won, but this neighborhood doesn't belong to you. I built it." "You built a cage," I said. "I just left the door open." She hung up. That night, I stayed up later than usual. Something in her voice lingered. Not fear, exactly. Not anger. It was something worse, certainty. She still believed she had one more move left. That scared me more than anything else, because Karen, cornered and humiliated, wasn't just unpredictable, she was resourceful. 3 days later, her final move came. It was a sunny Tuesday morning when the helicopters returned. Not 1, not 2, 4. Black and silver. 2 marked Homeland Security, 1 FBI, 1 unmarked. They hovered briefly, then descended across 3 different addresses in the neighborhood simultaneously. Raids. One of the homes belonged to a man named Cliff. Quiet guy, rarely talked, had once petitioned to ban Halloween decorations. Another was Linda's, a sweet old woman who ran the HOA's garden club. The third? Eileen's. Turns out, Karen hadn't been acting alone. She'd created a network, a kind of HOA militia, who were tasked with monitoring neighbors, enforcing her version of community purity, and keeping files. Actual files. On families, children, medical conditions, marital status, everything. It was Karen's own private surveillance operation, and it ran deeper than anyone thought. The FBI uncovered encrypted emails, hidden cameras disguised as bird feeders, and a list labeled high-risk nonconformists. My name was at the top. That's when the headlines changed. It wasn't just about one crazy woman anymore. Now it was a full-blown federal investigation into suburban harassment, privacy violations, and organized HOA abuse. Karen's lawsuit vanished into smoke. She was hit with a new round of charges, including conspiracy, cyberstalking, and even obstruction of justice for trying to delay her trial through frivolous litigation. Connors called me again. "She's done," he said. "She'll be in federal custody by the end of the week." I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Because even as they took her away, this time in a federal transport van, not a cruiser, Karen turned her head and smiled at me from the back window. Not a pleasant smile. A knowing one. Like she still believed her story would end on her terms. I ignored it. Mostly. That weekend, I hosted a community barbecue. The veterans I'd donated the house to were there, flipping burgers and telling jokes. Kids ran through sprinklers. People brought lawn chairs, soda, homemade pies. For the first time since I'd moved in, the street felt like a neighborhood. No rules. No fines. Just people. Eileen wasn't there. She was awaiting trial. Neither was Cliff or Linda. All suspended from their jobs and barred from contacting any HOA affiliate. The board was officially disbanded, the bylaws shredded. A community vote formally dissolved the HOA with over 90% approval. Someone asked me to give a speech. I kept it short. "I moved here thinking I'd just be a caretaker for my dad," I said. Instead, I ended up defending an entire neighborhood. And all I had to do was stand up to someone who thought power was the same thing as ownership. It's not. Power comes from trust, respect, and sometimes a little patience and sarcasm. The crowd laughed. That night, I sat with my dad on the porch, drinking lemonade and watching the sun go down. He looked better, stronger than he had in months. "She's gone?" he asked. "Not just her," I said. "The whole rotten tree." He nodded. "Good. Maybe now I can garden without getting a citation for planting non-regulation petunias." I smiled. "The yard's yours again, old man." He raised his glass. "To the airspace. May it remain bullet-free." We clinked glasses and watched the sky turn gold. And for once, there wasn't a single drone, helicopter, or HOA directive in sight. 2 months after the final raid, the house across the street, the one that once flew a flag reading Neighborhood Sovereignty Enforcement Zone, was listed for sale. New siding, fresh paint, all remnants of Karen scrubbed from existence like someone pressure washed the memory out of it. I watched from my porch as a young couple toured the property with a realtor. They seemed confused when the agent warned them, sheepishly, that there was some history tied to the address. They probably assumed mold or bad plumbing. I hoped they never Googled Karen Medivac shooter, unless they were emotionally prepared. Life in the neighborhood had settled into a strange kind of peace. Without the HOA breathing down everyone's neck, people actually started talking to one another again. The lawn inspection patrols stopped. The passive-aggressive flyers disappeared. Even the neighbor with the 10-foot inflatable unicorn in his yard was met with laughter instead of complaint. We had a block party that wasn't technically sanctioned by anything. No fines. No permits. Just families, food, and music. It was chaos, but it was our chaos. Karen, meanwhile, was facing more years in prison than I had spent alive. Her final sentencing hearing happened via secure video call, because no courthouse in the region wanted the media circus she tended to bring. She sat in a beige jumpsuit with her hair pulled back, the once queen of cul-de-sacs reduced to a woman shackled to a desk, trying to argue that she was the victim of a psychological siege engineered by a hostile civilian with military ties. The judge, a dry-faced woman with no time for theatrics, shut her down cold. She listed every charge: interfering with federal rescue operations, discharging a firearm at an aircraft, coordinated harassment, unauthorized surveillance, civil rights violations. When she finished, she offered Karen one final opportunity to speak. Karen leaned into the camera, narrowed her eyes, and said, "You can take my house, my committee, my skies, but not my truth." The judge gave her 21 years. I watched the livestream on my laptop while sipping coffee and wearing the exact same hoodie Karen once called a disgrace to the community aesthetic. I even posted a photo on the neighborhood message board, me giving a thumbs up next to my flat-roofed shed with the caption, "Still not HOA compliant. Still standing." Connors called me again later that week. He said the agency was closing out the last pieces of the case, wrapping up Karen's wider network and monitoring any HOA boards across the country that showed signs of similar abuse. Apparently, Karen had inspired a sort of internal audit frenzy. Boards were being dissolved from California to Florida. It was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. "Funny," Connors said. "All this started with a helicopter landing in your yard." "No," I corrected him. "It started when someone mistook a title for authority. The helicopter just forced everyone to look up." After Karen's sentencing, I got another knock at the door. This one from a man in his 60s with silver hair, a crisp blazer, and the calm demeanor of someone used to being obeyed. He introduced himself as Warren LeClaire, representative of a private foundation. The name didn't ring a bell until he said who he worked for: the National Coalition for Victims of Malicious HOA Abuse. Turns out they'd been quietly tracking cases like mine for years, gathering stories, pushing legislation. Karen's case was their golden goose. "You're something of a legend in our circles," he said. "Would you be willing to testify before Congress?" I blinked. "Testify? We're pushing a new federal bill. The Homeowner Privacy and Oversight Act. You'd be the face." It felt surreal. Me? A guy who just wanted to take care of his dad and maybe grow tomatoes in peace? But then I remembered everything. The gunshots, the fines, the fake petitions, the neighbors afraid to hang a flag on their porch without approval. Yet I could speak. A month later, I stood in a room on Capitol Hill with 5 other victims. One woman had been sued for hanging wind chimes. Another man lost his dog to a wrongful HOA order to remove unapproved animals. The stories were absurd and tragic in equal measure. And when it was my turn, I kept it simple. I watched a woman shoot at a Medivac because she thought saving my father's life was an attack on neighborhood order. And for years before that, she weaponized a title and a clipboard to terrorize anyone who didn't bow to her version of perfect. What I want isn't revenge. It's protection. Not for me, I'm fine now. For the next person who moves in thinking a neighborhood is supposed to feel like home. Afterward, I got a standing ovation. The bill passed its first committee review with full support. When I got home, there was a letter in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name in tight, careful handwriting. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper with a handwritten note. "You won. But don't forget, you're just one storm away from becoming what you fought." I recognized the writing. Karen. I turned the letter over. Nothing else. No threat, just that sentence. She'd mailed it from prison. Not an apology. Not a denial. A warning. Or maybe a challenge. I burned it in the fireplace. The house across the street finally sold. The new owners moved in on a Saturday with a toddler, a golden retriever, and a massive neon hammock they strung between the porch columns. Within hours, 3 kids were swinging on it, and no one yelled about weight limits or architectural violations. I brought over lemonade and introduced myself. "Is there a homeowners association here?" the mom asked. "Nope," I said. "Just neighbors." She grinned. "Best words I've heard all week." As spring settled in, my dad finally got his hands dirty again, kneeling in the garden, humming to his dahlias. He said he felt better now than he had in 5 years. I believed him. I watched him work from the deck, no choppers, no sirens, no banshee shrieks from across the fence. At night, the neighborhood glowed with mismatched porch lights, solar lamps, and wind spinners that would have sent Karen into cardiac arrest. We let them spin anyway. One evening, as I took out the trash, I noticed a group of kids chalking on the sidewalk. One had drawn a big helicopter, blue and white, with little stick-figure medics dangling from the bottom. I asked them what they were drawing. "It's a rescue," one said. "Like in that story my mom told me. About the crazy lady and the guy who stopped her." I blinked. "What guy?" She pointed at me and grinned. "You!" I didn't know what to say. I just laughed. Not a sarcastic laugh. Not a bitter one. A real laugh. I looked up at the sky. Quiet. Clear. And for the first time since all this began, I finally let myself breathe. Not because the battle was over, but because I knew that even if it started again, I was ready. And because this time, if anyone ever tried to aim at the sky again, they'd have to go through all of us.